On a fog-snarled moor in North Yorkshire, the wind still carries whispers around the charred remains of Blackthorn House. In 1926, its heiress, Eleanor Greaves, was found hanging in the nursery, her diary clutched to her chest. But weeks later, fresh entries began appearing in her handwriting, detailing events no living soul could know: the caretaker's suicide, the vicar's confession, and the child found stitched inside a wolf pelt. For nearly a century, local authorities sealed the Greaves journals unsuitable for public release. Until 2120, I've obtained digital scans the church tried to erase. Comment your country if you're brave enough to read what Eleanor wrote after death. The air in the West Wing hadn't moved in decades. The door groaned its warning, metal hinges blistered with age, but Mara pushed through, camera slung over one shoulder, her gloved hand trembling slightly as she stepped into the rot. It smelled of ammonia and vinegar, of old books and sweet milk turned sour, sickly sweet and maternal. Dust clung to her coat, as though the walls themselves were trying to remember her. Her breath echoed too loud in the long corridor. Above her, the ceiling bowed. Beneath her boots, the floor whispered. She found the nursery at the end of the hall. The window was blacked out with soot or time, casting the room in an underwater grey. Paint peeled in strips from the plaster, and something moist, or perhaps mold, crawled up the inside of the crib's legs like ivy in reverse. There were no dolls, but the room was not empty. Toys slumped beneath warped shelves, a wooden horse with a cracked face, a stringless marionette with nails for eyes, a music box sealed shut with rust. When Mara knelt, her knee struck something beneath the floorboards. She did not mean to pry, but she always brought her flathead knife. Archivists must, for locks and lids and truth. The plank came loose with a long breath of air, sodden and warm, as though the house exhaled. Beneath it, nestled in ash, were teeth, tiny ones, dozens. Some still wore the faint curve of bloodline milk teeth, not yet meant to leave the mouth, and nestled beside them, a scrap of singed lace, a note, childlike, smeared with syrup. If I am good, she will stay. If I am quiet, she will sing. The sound came then, faint but impossible, humming, direction, no throat, just the sound of someone remembering too softly to be living. Mara stood. The camera trembled against her ribs. She turned, her boot slid slightly, and she looked down. Milk spilled, fresh. It spread in a thin film from beneath the crib, coagulated at the edges. Beside it, a small porcelain bowl turned on its side. She bent to examine the lip. On the underside, scrawled in iron nib ink, for Eleanor. If she wakes hungry. The name struck something in her, a record, perhaps, a girl lost, a mother buried. She had read too many like them, but this felt near a dot on the far wall. Beneath curling wallpaper, a line of tiny handprints had been pressed into the plaster, 6 in total, one darker than the rest, like it had been pressed after the fire. Above them, a hanging rope still swung. It had once held a bell. Mara turned toward the dresser, drawn. Its drawers had swollen shut, but she managed the topmost one. Inside, a scorched Bible, cracked and flaking like burnt bark. Across the first page, in blackened script, the Greaves family. We do not forget. We do not forgive. We do not speak aloud. The pages were fused with soot, but one had been kept free, as though spared. By design, the passage read, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not." Beneath it, except the small one, "She belongs to ash." A thud echoed behind her. She turned, heart in her teeth, but the room was still. The crib hadn't moved, but something beneath it had shifted. A corner of parchment, lifted by unseen breath. She crouched, drew it out. It was a diary page, half-burned, edges curled inward like a scream, written in a looping child hand. She said I was never born. She said I was left behind in the font. But I remember her voice when the fire came. I remember her singing. Mara's pulse crawled. The fire. She checked the wall again behind the layer of decay. She now saw the shadow of scorch. Smoke had touched every part of the nursery, except the bowl. The humming began again, lower this time, wavering, like it couldn't decide whose voice to wear. Mara followed it, not physically, but internally, like a string tugging somewhere between her ears. Her eyes stung something old, an unshed weld in her chest. She stepped toward the wardrobe. The knob was warm. It opened not with a creak but a hush. Inside, a veil still pinned, yellowed and riddled with holes. Beneath it, a bonnet too small, too clean. At its center, stitched in red thread, in no more. She touched the veil, it dissolved. As the threads floated downward, something else became visible. A doll, but wrong. Its face was scraped, as if by nails. Its eyes stitched with thick black thread, in a crude X, and around its neck, strung tightly, a rosary made of something pale and porous, not beads. Teeth. The thread snapped at her touch. The rosary fell, scattered, each tooth clicking like fingernails on wood. One bounced toward the crib, and came to rest just beneath it, as if returned. The humming ceased. Mara swallowed. Her fingers were shaking now, though she hadn't noticed. She pulled out her notebook, jotted, Eleanor Greaves' teeth. Fire. And then, louder than thought, a breath. From behind the door, she froze, waited, but nothing came. Just the faintest trace of warmth, as if someone had been standing there a moment ago, watching. She turned back to the dresser. The scorched Bible had fallen open. It now showed a different page. No hand had turned it. The passage read, "She did not die. She was unbaptized. She stayed." Mara fled. She did not run, not visibly. But inside, her ribs collapsed inward, like closing shutters. The cold followed her down the corridor, humming lightly, faintly, like it could not be helped. She locked the west wing behind her. Her camera flickered once, then died. The film, later, would be blank. But that night, as she developed what little she had, something else emerged. Not in photo but in voice. On the recording, beneath the static, a lullaby, soft, familiar. And at the end so faint it might have been imagined, a child's voice, whispering, "I drank all the milk. May I sleep now?" In 1974, archivist Mara Fenton broke into Blackthorn House's condemned West Wing. She found Eleanor's diary lying open, its last entry, dated 47 days after Eleanor's death. The ink was warm. The coroner would later write that the light was failing when he entered the nursery, but it had been failing for years. Rain ticked against the warped window pane in long, uncertain strokes. A crucifix hung crooked above the crib. Its wooden Christ bowed as if listening for something beneath the floorboards. The nursery stank of scorched linens and sour milk. It had been Eleanor Greaves' room once, before the marriage, before the infant, before she began writing to someone no one else could see. They found her just after hanging from the rafter beam above the cradle, her feet brushing the soft edge of the nursery rug. The rosary had snapped. She had tied it back together with her own hair. The rope was a braided sheet, frayed from use, knotted 3 times, as if to hold the weight of both her and her silence. Her nightdress was ironed, starched at the collar. Beneath it, her clavicle jutted like folded wings. In one hand, she clutched her diary. In the other, a scrap of veil stained with milk. No one saw her place the bowl beneath the crib, but it was there, still warm. The milk had bloomed slightly at the edges, skinning over with the first signs of blue. The coroner, Charles Lunn, had been young, newly appointed, a man of procedure. He'd insisted on entering the room alone, not out of courage, but superstition. The matron had crossed herself 3 times before handing him the ring of keys. He hesitated before stepping in. It wasn't the sight of the body, it was the stillness, the kind that made your ears ring, the kind that suggests something is waiting. Eleanor's face was slack, her lips parted, her tongue bore a small puncture wound, as if bitten. The coroner leaned in, squinting. There was a streak of ink between her teeth, the same shade used in her diary. It had not yet dried. He recorded the details. Female, 28, slight bruising around the neck, no visible struggle, body still warm, eyelids twitching faintly as if caught mid-dream. The flickering light bulb overhead let out a tiny pop, then hissed into darkness. He blinked hard, adjusted. His lantern threw grotesque shadows across the nursery. For a moment, the rocking horse in the corner seemed to nod. He did not approach it. Instead, he knelt beside the cradle, where a faint stain marbled the mattress. Milk had soaked into the padding, pooling beneath. A lullaby had been carved into the wood with something sharp. "If she sleeps, I stay. If she cries, I leave." The same phrase appeared later in the diary, written in alternating hands. The sheet around her neck was not knotted in a traditional noose, but looped in a ceremonial pattern over under, style sometimes used by penitents during old rites of self-purification. When he asked the sisters if Eleanor had been involved in any such rituals, none answered. But one, Sister Alina, later wrote in the margins of her hymnal, "I heard the rope before I saw it." When Lunn lifted Eleanor down, her head lolled to the side, and a page slipped from the diary's spine. He did not see it fall, but he would dream of it that night. The sheet was heavy with the weight of milk, and something older. On Eleanor's back, someone had written a word in ash, unbaptized. Her hair clung to it like moss over stone. Lunn placed her on the bed, gently. Something inside the mattress crunched. He paused, then lifted the sheets. Beneath them, stuffed into the ticking, were more teeth. Not human-sized, small, far too many for one child. Some were wrapped in linen. One was threaded onto a hymnal string, as if meant to be worn. He sealed them in a cloth pouch, marked them miscellaneous. The mirror above the bureau was veiled. In black cloth, he lifted it without meaning to, and saw not himself, but Eleanor still hanging, still swaying, though her body now lay behind him. He dropped the cloth. The mirror cracked a spidering line down the center. When he turned, the body had not moved. He read the diary by lamplight, outside the nursery. Most of it was grief in bloom. Motherless mornings, voices in the crib, the rustling lull of a song. No one taught her, but near the end, her words shifted. She began to refer to the smallest, never a name, only that, she hums when I look away. The teeth are for her. They must be, or she will open her mouth again. The final entry, half-torn. The rope is not to die, it is to keep me from waking. Lunn did not sleep for 4 days. He filed the report with minimal detail: suicide, undetermined mental state, postnatal melancholy. But he did not mention the diary. He kept it in his drawer for reasons he would never articulate. Even when pressed. 1 week later, his wife found him sleepwalking into their infant daughter's room, humming a melody she did not know. His eyes were open. His hands were trembling. She would later tell police he looked like he was trying to climb something that wasn't there. He took leave shortly after. No cause given. In 1942, a journalist visited the parish and requested access to the nursery for a historical piece. The room was sealed. The matron on duty said the beams were unsafe. When pressed, she only said, "No one who hears the lullaby leaves it behind." That winter, the parish flooded. The west wing remained dry. Inside the nursery, the bowl still stood beneath the crib, a thick skin now crusted over the milk. The rosary, long since removed from Eleanor's hand, had been replaced with a thread of red twine. Around it, the dust refused to settle. They said the rug had to be taken out, that it still bore the imprint of 2 feet, barely touching down. Some said it was a draft. Some said it was mourning maid. Manifest. The rug was burned in 1953, but the marks returned, each time in the end. The parish stopped removing them. By 1970, only one person still spoke Eleanor's name aloud, a nun with a cleft tongue and no recorded baptism. She claimed to have seen Eleanor walk the nursery 3 nights after the hanging. Not a ghost, just a woman, holding a book no longer hers, humming a lullaby no child should know. The coroner wrote Eleanor's name 3 times on the certificate. By the 3rd, his hand shook. By the time Thomas Blythe wrote his final entry, the ink had soaked through the page and bled into the wood. The paper itself smelled of damp stone and camphor. He had not dated it. He hadn't needed to. The letter was found folded 3 times and sealed with twine. Left atop a bundle of rusted keysri, in total each labeled, in an unsteady hand, nursery, boiler, and pantry. They were found beside his body, knees curled toward his chest, back against the furnace door, as if he had been listening for warmth. They say he was the last to enter the condemned West Wing before the lockdown in 32. But Thomas had been hearing her long before then. In the creaking pipes, the lull between cold deliveries, in the hush between his own thoughts, the first sound was always footsteps, never hurried, never soft, just slow and certain, pacing the floorboards above the kitchen long after the chapel. Bells had gone still. He tried, at first, to blame the rats, or Sister Alina's clumsy tread, but the sound carried differently, measured, barefoot, sometimes stopping just long enough for him to forget before resuming right where it left off. He'd been caretaker for 16 years. He knew the building like breath, its pipes, its ghosts. He'd slept in its attic, knelt in its crypt, and replaced the very bell that cracked during the hanging. He'd never once considered fear, until Eleanor. He never spoke her name aloud, but he'd seen her, or thought he had. The first time, she was standing in the south cloister, pale as the bell ropes, hair plaited and damp. Her back was turned. Her dress was wrong too thin for November, and The hem dragged like soaked linen. When he blinked, she was gone. The floor was dry, but one of the pew hymnals had been turned to a child's page. When I was small, I drank the sky and choked. It had been circled in wax dot that same week. Thomas lost the pantry key. He didn't notice until he tried to bring salt up for the cellar pickling. The ring was short one. He retraced every step, down to his boots. It turned up 4 days later, neatly hung on the nursery door handle. He hadn't gone near the nursery in over a year, not since the milk started curdling before the morning, since the rosary string began unraveling on its own. He told the priest, softly, in confession. The old man had only shaken his head. She was buried, he said, eyes closed. Let her rot. But rot doesn't pace. Rot doesn't hum. Thomas began locking the pantry at night, not because he feared theft, but because he kept finding things. Moved, the salt disturbed, the sewing basket unthreaded, and once the cradle blanket folded into the corner, warm to the touch. He started leaving offerings, though he'd never called them that. A bowl of milk, a hymnal page, one rusted nail, anything to keep the third key from vanishing. Done. In March of 1932, a visitor came, an archivist from Bristol, tall and dry-voiced, with a folded letter and a diocese stamp. He asked after Eleanor, said there were discrepancies in the record, 2 death entries, dated 47 days apart. Thomas said he didn't know, but the man lingered, said something about post-mortem ink, as if it meant something. That night, the pacing returned, not above, below. He heard it beneath the floorboards in his quarters, not footsteps dragging, as if something small were pulling itself forward on bloodless limbs. When he pressed his ear to the floor, the humming began. Low, female, familiar. He pressed harder. The boards were warm. He burned the pantry key that night, but it reappeared 2 days later, tucked under his pillow, bound with a single lock of pale hair. The letter in his desk grew longer. He began addressing it directly, to the one beneath. He no longer tried to understand. He only described, "You scratched the inside of the dumbwaiter door tonight. I saw the marks. I counted 4 like fingers. One of them smaller." He stopped eating, stopped going to chapel. He waited. The nursery had been nailed shut in 28, but one nail had gone missing. He saw it one morning gleaming in the hearth ashes, still warm to the touch. His hair began to fall out in patches. He was heard whispering lullabies to the cistern, and, finally, on the day the priest died of his own rupture, Thomas unlocked the pantry one last time. It had been boarded since the famine years. No one used it now. The door creaked as it opened, brittle and warped, exhaling that sour sweet smell of fermented cloth and iron. Inside, nothing. At first, that then light. His lantern flickered and settled. Dust curled from the corners like unspooled thread. On the far wall, the bricks had bowed outward, as if something behind them had pushed. The air tasted of old meat. He stepped inside. The third key, heavy in his palm, felt warmer now. He touched the wall, the brick, flaked, and beneath the crumbling grout, fur brown, stitched. He scraped away more. There was something embedded, a form small. He should have left, but the child had no eyes, only thread. Its mouth was sewn shut. The fur had been wrapped tightly, matted with soot, stitched at the joints with veiled wire. A hymn tag was pinned to its chest. For her, when she is small. He collapsed shortly after. The furnace stoked itself that night. Some say the sound of the latch was heard again at midnight, the pantry key turning once in an invisible lock. The next morning the firemen found him beside the door, teeth clenched, so tightly they had splintered. One hand gripped the diary, the other, the burnt stub of a candle. Around his neck, tied loosely, a child's bonnet. When he unlocked the servants' pantry, he found the child stitched in fur. They told Father Caro, the diary must be silenced, not burned, not buried, silenced. It was 1927, the year after the hanging, and something in the walls of Blackthorn had turned. The bells had begun to echo wrong, one tone, always flat, as if the sound refused to rise. The font water darkened when no one watched it, and Sister Alina had bitten through her tongue while humming a hymn no one recognized. The sacristy doors wept resin. No one entered the nursery without nausea. The priest told himself it was grief. The house had seen too much sorrow too quickly. But then came the ash. It fell in small, grey flakes from the baptismal archfiner's flower, cold to the touch, clinging to vestments and scripture margins. At first, he swept it away. By midwinter, it returned as soot-stained prints. Once, a handprint, smaller than his palm, near the chalice cupboard. Another time, 3 long streaks down the inside of the font, as if something had tried to climb out. That was when he began to fast. He was not a superstitious man, but scripture he knew was not the only language the church had kept. There were darker pages, the old rites, the mirrored chants. He retrieved the locked volume from the sacristy cellar, its edges warped, bound in unlabeled calfskin. Its prayers were reversals, rites meant not for salvation, but silencing, not exorcism, but erasure. He studied for 3 nights, did not sleep, did not write, only turned pages and listened to the walls, to the distant hum, to the careful creak of Eleanor's lullaby, crawling back through the floor. It began with the hymnals. He gathered the ones left open in the nave, and arranged them in a spiral around the font, 13 in total, each page marked with black ribbon, opened to a verse that Eleanor had once circled in her diary. He remembered her voice, quiet, uncertain, too grown for the child she still was. She had sung without moving her lips. The diary was placed at the center, spine cracked open to its final entry. She doesn't sleep when I speak, so I'll stop. The font was drained that morning, but by evening, the basin had filled itself still water, lined with ash, and floating atop it, a scrap of veil, burned at the edges, and a single milk tooth. He lit the censer anyway. The rite called for reversed soul, each word recited backward, lips dry, tongue twisted against the sacred. He spoke until blood flecked the corners of his mouth, until the sound of his own voice no longer resembled his own. The candles hissed, the stained glass trembled, one cracked. A shaft of red light fell across the font. Like a wound, he reached for the diary, but it had closed itself. The air behind him moved, no wind, just a weight. The hymn began faint, breathless, as if sung through water, as if sung from beneath the stone. Domini, D-O-M-U-S, D-O-R-M-I-O, But it wasn't Latin, not really. He turned nothing, only the cracked icon of St. Agnes on the wall, her painted eyes gone to mildew, her lamb missing a head. He pressed the book into the water. The ash rose up. It did not dissolve, it clung. The hymn rose with it. Higher. The diary pages began to flutter, as if resisting. One tore, then another. Ink bled from the margins, not outward, but in. The words began to vanish. He did not stop. He forced the book deeper, until the spine split. Ash hissed into his eyes. His vision went white, then red. He dropped the book. It floated unburned. The hymn ceased. He stared at the font. The water had gone. Still again, but the ash was gone. Only the tooth remained, bobbing gently near the rim. He reached for it, and something beneath the surface grabbed his wrist. It was not cold. It was not warm. It felt like pressure without touch, like breath held too long, like memory. He did not scream. He could not. The force receded. He withdrew his hand. His palm bore a small, round mark, a fingerprint too small to be his. He left the chapel in silence, did not return. That night he wrote in his journal hand, trembling, ink pooling at the edges, "She will not be undone." The hymn reversed itself. I think it knows her name. I think it baptized it. The entry ended mid-word. The ink streaked. A single, smudged fingerprint remained pressed in soot beside the blot. The vicar's journal entries stopped. Mid-word in 1927. The page was smeared with soot, and a single child's fingerprint. Mara waited until dusk before returning to the nursery. Light revealed too much. It made the mold shimmer and the ivy seem almost alive where it slipped between the window frames. But dusk dulled the room into shadow-soft edges, and that made the peeling wallpaper feel less like skin. She stepped lightly. The old wood-remembered footsteps too well. She'd first seen the pattern, barely a motif at all, while cataloguing paint layers from the western hallway. A thin clovered imprint beneath 6 others, almost invisible beneath mildew. But in the nursery, the same pattern repeated behind every tier. Not painted, not stenciled, raised. Embedded. She hadn't told the others. They were down in the archive shed, dusting rust from binding clasps, and murmuring about Eleanor's journal. Let them. The real history never stayed in ink. The nursery smelled of turned milk, and something underneath a copper tent, faint but insistently familiar. A crib with no bottom stood in the center like a frame for an absence. The ceiling sagged with damp lace. Mara pulled her sleeves up to the elbow and set her palm flat. against the nearest patch of exposed plaster. Cold, textured, it scraped the edge of her fingerprint. She drew her thumbnail along the surface. Something, white flaked loose, not paint. Tooth. Tiny, rounded, yellowing at the root. Mara froze, then looked closer. The wall was littered with them. Hundreds, embedded like fossils. Baby teeth, milk teeth. She corrected herself automatically, each one pressed root first into the plaster. Arranged, not randomly, but in vertical rows. Symbols, almost like runes. She stepped back, heart slow and heavy. The teeth gleamed softly, catching what little light filtered through the ivor-choked glass. Some were cracked, others were worn smooth as if handled often, worried like rosary beads. A few were wrapped in old thread. One bore a drop of black wax. She touched a second one. It moved slightly under pressure, like it remembered being loose. A sound behind the lath. A settling, maybe. A shifting. Mara looked to the window, still sealed. The ivy barely stirred. She tried to photograph the wall, but her lens refused to focus. 3 times she lifted the camera. 3 times it clicked, then returned only blur and shadow. Once, the blur had a shape. Something hunched. She tucked the camera away. There were records, she remembered. Parish maps older than Blackthorn House, older than the fire. Older, even, than Eleanor. She unrolled them in the upstairs hallway, using a brick to weigh the corners. Beneath the current structure labeled simply Children's Dormitory, 1871, lay traces of something else. A darker ink, almost scrubbed. Sanctum Dominarum, 1483. A convent, one struck through with red wax. There was a note in the margin. Novena ceased. Entry sealed. All sisters presumed lost. Mara closed her eyes. The nursery had been built over their chapel. She returned to the wall. A single patch now pulsed behind the pattern, slightly domed, as if the plaster had swelled. The runes surrounding it were more densely packed, their placement almost scriptural. She reached toward it with one gloved hand and began to peel. The wallpaper came loose in slow, wet sighs. Beneath the outline of a face, not sculpted. Pressed. She staggered back, bile sudden in her throat. The impression wasn't detailed, but the depth was clear. A small nose, the arc of a brow, part of a mouth, lipless and slack. The plaster sunk inward like something had breathed once and never exhaled, and around it more teeth, smaller, these not embedded but fused. One had a faint line of blood dried in its crack. Another had writing, scratched into its enamel, Agnes. Behind her, the crib shifted, just once, just enough to make the metal groan. She turned, nothing. But something lay inside now, a page. She stepped forward slowly, shoes creaking. The paper was old, crumbling at the edges, folded thrice, and sealed with a wax imprint of a veil. She opened it, a prayer. Written in reverse Latin. The same prayer from Father Caro's journal. The same ink Eleanor had smeared before her death. Let her gums still the hymn. Her breath left her all at once. The teeth weren't trophies, they were keys. She ran her hand along the wall again. Behind one row, she felt it a hollow space, a cavity she dug. Fingernails broke. The plaster crumbled dry, then damp, then cloth, coarse, ancient. A habit, tangled in it. More teeth, human hair, a rotted ribbon still shaped into a bow, wax shaped like an ear. She kept digging. Her gloves tore. She felt splinters, bone maybe wood. And then, inside the wall, a breath. Soft, wet, as if a child were just behind the lath, fogging it with their quiet. She stepped back. The wall no longer seemed flat. It pulsed, gently, like a lung beneath water, and from somewhere within, the sound of a lullaby hummed out, not sung, exactly, whispered as if through stitched lips. Mara pressed her hand to the spot again. It was warm. Beneath her thumb, one of the embedded teeth shifted. It was newly placed, its root still pink, her own thumb. She pulled her hand back. Blood. She stared at it, then at the page, then at the wall. The humming stopped, but behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of something small scuttling into the crib. Children's milk teeth arranged like runes, hidden beneath layers of ivy-stained wallpaper. The hill where they found her had no name, only stone teeth jutting through the moss, like a jaw had been buried there long before the girl came. It was Martha Pye who first saw her. She had gone to gather nettleroot before the morning frost set in. The sheep refused the slope now. A few had broken legs, others just refused to step forward. eyes rolling until they collapsed from thirst rather than past the edge of the hedgerow. The sky was pale and toothless, the kind of color that had no warmth behind it. And yet, the girl lay still undisturbed by frost or crow. She was no older than 5. Her eyelids had been sewn open with black sinew, stitches looping through lid and brow. Her eyes were not glassed, not dull, they simply didn't see Volse. Pelt was buttoned tightly over her chest, the fur still soft, ears intact. The paws had been tucked beneath her chin, as though the beast were praying for her. Its mouth stitched shut with linen framed her throat like a hood. Martha dropped the roots. Later, she said the girl looked peaceful, but it was the kind of peace that came after screaming. Something silenced, something spent. The air around her smelled of boiled milk and dog musk. A bell string hung around her ankle. Torn. One cracked bell lay beside her head, half buried in soil. The other had been pressed into her palm and fused there with wax. The wax was yellow, the same color they used in the old baptisms before the fonts were drained. They said it was foxes that opened her chest, but foxes don't leave the heart. She had been arranged. The moss beneath her was bleached in the shape of a cradle. They brought the body to the sacristy. Father Elric refused to touch her. Instead, he locked the door and told Martha to write it in the ledger. But she never finished the entry. The ink bled mid-word. The next page bore only 6 scrawled words. Not in her hand. The offering is complete. Silence will hold. No date. No signature. The wolfskin was gone by morning. Some say the pelt moved on its own, slid across the flagstones like a shadow swimming, vanishing down the bell tower chute. Others said Father Elric burned it, but the sacristy chimney was cold. In the following weeks, milk spoiled faster than before. Hymns echoed from the wrong ends of the chapel. A child went missing. A bell kept ringing just once. Always once at 3:11 a.m. The girl's body was never claimed. She had no name, they said, but her teeth had already been numbered. The coroner's notes, half-torn and water-stained, list only the word retained. Beneath dental column, the rest is crossed out. In soot. Mara found the ledger buried under linen in the vestry during restoration, its pages moth-eaten and warm with mildew. She didn't open it at first. She only brushed off the threads, thinking it was dust. Then she saw the stitching, a single line sewn across the spine, thin as infant hair. When she pried it loose, the wax flaked. Inside, the sketch of a bell, and then a name, scrawled sideways along the margin. Agnes. Ignis. It returned again, a few pages later. Not as a signature, but an accusation. Agnes refused. She heard the child. In that same entry, the ink changed midway, mid-sentence, mid-letter, as if someone else had taken the pen with a shaking hand. The rest was written backwards. Mara sat on the chapel floor, knees drawn to her chest, and read each entry aloud, quietly, the way one reads an apology too late. And behind her, from the font, a ripple. It should have been dry, but a slow stream of soot circled the drain, bubbling gently, as if something just beneath were breathing. Waiting, she walked toward it, ledger still open, her fingers tightening. Inside the font, wax, carved roughly into a disc, pressed with the imprint of a bell. The wax hissed as it sank, dissolving into the soot, and underneath, a glimpse of fur. Mara dropped the book. Pages opened to the sketch again, but this time, there was something new beside it. A small face. Eyes, stitched open. The ink was still wet. She was no older than 5. Her eyelids stitched open. A wolf's pelt buttoned across her chest. The diary arrived by post. No return address. No stamp. Just a wax seal, cracked at the edges, and a rust-colored thread woven through the spine, almost invisible, until touched. Then it stung, like nettle. Mara found it on the chapel doorstep after the 4th frost. She knew before opening it. Hand she had seen it before, pressed in soot across the old laundry wall. A print no one could scrub away no matter how often the bricks were 5 small fingers, smeared into the shape of a psalm. The diary pages breathed faintly when opened, as if warmed from within. The ink had no gloss, no scent, just weight. Sentences marked in tight, curdled script, the kind that comes not from handwriting but from some deeper muscle memory, something not taught, but inherited. And the dates, they weren't old. The first was just 5 days past, January 3rd. It described in sickening accuracy Mara's descent into the rectory crypt. Her breath, the creak of the latch, the hymn she didn't remember humming, and the last line, he's still under the tiles. Don't let him stop singing. Mara closed the book, but it didn't stay closed. A sound behind her, soft, like fingernails grazing vellum. She turned. Nothing. Only the chapel's stillness. But the open page fluttered once more, then stopped. New date, January 6th. They watched. Me today. The caretaker weeps in the pantry. He does not know I've taken my hand back. She flipped back to the final burial entry. Eleanor, Oldcroft, suicide. Buried February 14th, 1926. Exhumed September 17, 1930. Reburied. Incomplete. Left hand missing. The margin had a note added in pencil. Claw marks on inside lid. Nails bloodless. Mara rose, dragging the diary with her. Her shoes echoed down the nave. The broken saints above the altar had started to tilt again. Fractures in the ceiling paint returning, like veins finding their old course. She thought of her grandmother's phrase. Some graves settle twice. Outside the snow fell without pattern. Not gentle, not violent, just persistent. She followed the footprints, not hers, smaller, bare. They stopped at the edge of the font. It had frozen over, but not fully. The surface had cracked jagged lines like veins in bone china. At its center, a single human tooth, small, milk-white, unrooted. She felt a pressure behind her eyes, like memory wanting to come forward, but needing permission. Mara bent. The diary pulsed once in her hand. She opened to a new entry, not dated. You let them hum. That's how it comes back. Each line was followed by a print, a child's left hand, smeared in some iron-colored ink, pressed between sentences like a seal. She dropped the book, but it didn't fall flat. It landed upright, as if caught. Mara backed away, her breath left in small gusts. And then a whisper, soft, familiar. It did not come from her throat. Father took the ink, so I took the hand. She ran back through the nave, past the cracked icons, past the hymnals that no longer held words, down into the vestry, where the air grew damp with old garments and something else, something buried. She turned on the restoration lamp. It clicked. Light spread across the ledger table, illuminating the fragments they'd recovered from the nursery. Floor, hair clippings, marbled wax, a cracked mirror, bearing only the top half of a reflection. The diary sat in the center, closed again. Her gloves trembled as she reached for it, afraid it would breathe, but this time it didn't. Instead, a new shape on the spine. Not a print, not a title, but a seam, roughly stitched, looping thread through leather and paper and sinew. Mara fetched the blade. She had used it before to cut hymnals free of mildew, to split ancient margins from binding glue, but this time it resisted. Each cut hissed, the kind of sound flesh makes when it's remembering fire. At last, the seam opened. Inside, something slid out, a single finger bone, polished, child-sized, with ink still in the nail bed. Mara dropped it onto the linen, but the linen absorbed nothing. It stained. The shape spread outward like a blot, but not random, curving, coiling, forming a crude spiral. At its center, the suggestion of a mouth. She whispered the date aloud, February 18th, not written in the diary, but engraved beneath the chapel, the date of the sealed confession. She retrieved a key from the votive box, the old brass one, long since bent, that no one believed opened anything anymore. She knew better. The crawlspace door groaned as it opened. Air exhaled from below, bitter and warm, like something had only just stopped burning. She climbed down. The stone walls had bled again, dark trails down either side, as though someone had dragged their fingers in mourning across both. And at the far end, beyond the shelf of censored records, a simple wooden box. Unmarked. Mara reached for it. The diary shook. She opened the box. Inside, cloth, soil and left hand. Small, preserved in salt. Fingers curled inward, as if trying to hold on to something long gone. But beneath it, more pages. Not Eleanor's script. Not at first. These were confessions, priests, sisters, a caretaker, each one ending with the same final line. We buried her. But she did not stay buried. And then on the final sheet, Eleanor's ink. The diary is not mine. It is my hand's. I only listened. Mara stared. The floor beneath her began to breathe. Wood shifting, stone, dampening from the darkness. 5 smudges along the wall. Not paint. Handprints. Ascending. She turned. The diary had followed her. It lay open on the step. One new line written across the center. Your ink tastes like fear. The last page bore no words, only a crude wet handprint. Weeks after burial, Eleanor's exhumed corpse was missing its left hand. The diary entries continued, signed only with a crude handprint. The satchel had not decayed. Its leather, though weather-scuffed, bore the weight of silence more than time. When Mara unbuckled its clasp, the metal sang softly like something remembering its purpose. Inside, tucked between a cracked rosary and a loop of child's braid, she found the hymnal dot. It was smaller than the others, child-sized, but bound in adult weight, cloth-wrapped, water-warped, pages stuck to one another, like they'd wept together. She carried it to the altar, where the light from the fractured stained-glass window cast long veins of red across the nave. The saints had long since lost their faces. Only hands remained outstretched, hollow-palmed, almost pleading. Mara laid the hymnal beneath them. When she opened it, the first page curled up, as if in recoil. A thin skin of milk had dried between the leaves. She scraped it with her thumbnail. The scent that rose was sick sweet, like something that had been warmed too long. Each hymn bore a small red line beneath the title. Not ink, not paint, but something thicker, finger-dragged. The lines were never straight. The first was Hymn for the Meek. Beneath it, scrawled faintly in pencil, January 12, 1894, Sister Vale drowned in the Baptismal. No record in the parish. Logs. The next hymn for the lost. Red / April 3, 1907. Brother Giles hanged himself in the bell tower. Rope missing, and then Hymn for the Silence, with a note smeared halfway through the page. She would not stop humming. The other children stopped eating. Mara closed her eyes. She remembered the bell tower, how the rope had once hummed when the wind passed just right, and how the glass at the choir loft trembled after vespers. She remembered Eleanor's voice not speaking, but humming, always a half-tone off, always in the same rhythm. The milk stains deepened toward the center of the hymnal. Some pages had fused entirely, sealed by age, and some forgotten right. Mara peeled them apart slowly. Hymn for the Waiting. March 6, 1911. Infant never named. Crib found full of soot. She felt something slide inside her throat. Not a word, just a pressure dot. She turned the page. A child's handprint. Left hand, not drawn, pressed, soaked through. Each finger tipped in red. She blinked. The pews groaned. Behind her, empty. She knew. She had checked. But something was listening now. Mara ran her fingertip beneath one of the red lines. It was still tacky. Still wet. The light from the window shifted dread across her palm. She read the next. Hymn for the Dusk. July 19, 1922. Father Mallory burned in Confessional. Door remained locked from inside. No ashes had ever been found. Mara turned slowly toward the choir loft. It was empty, but the air smelled of wax and scorched wood. She returned to the hymnal. Each page bore its wound. And then, Hymn for the Forgotten. No date, no name, but a margin note. Sing this only if she wakes. Beneath it, a faint carving in the page. They didn't bury her name. They baptized it. The pews cracked again. Dust lifted from the altar rail, dancing in the slanted light. She stepped back. Her boot crunched a tooth. Small milk-white. UNROOTED. Another beside it. Then another. They traced a path toward the pulpit. Mara followed. There, behind the lectern, a child's satchel lay open, empty. She looked back to the hymnal. Its last page, fluttered blank, except for a new line of red ink, drawn fresh, and a name beneath it, Mara. She dropped the book. The air thickened, like milk about to turn. She turned to run, but the hymn began. From nowhere, from everywhere, a child's voice, one note at a time. Each line followed by silence, then echo, then another voice, joining off key. The pews darkened, the window dimmed, and the hymnal closed itself. When Mara opened it again, every hymn marked with red ink led to a death in the parish archives. The parish sign had rusted into a nameless stain. Its wooden spine bowed as if in penance. Moss overtook the letters. The road bent inward toward it like a crooked finger, and then disappeared entirely. By 1935, the maps had ceased to mark Blackthorn with anything more than a blank patch. And by 1940, no one asked why Mara stood where. The rectory once rose, now only stones, soft with lichen, as if the land had tried to digest what remained. The bell tower was gone. Even the memory of its chime felt too loud here. In her hand, she held the only thing left, a parish census ledger. From 1919, ink faded to paleness. As if ashamed to remain, she ran her fingers across the names. One by one, they blurred not just by time, but by something older than time, something that did not wish to be spoken aloud. The grass beneath her boot was damp despite a week of sun. It smelled of iron and milk. She turned toward the chapel's former threshold. Its shape still lingered in the earth-darkened stone like a bruise beneath the overgrown nettles. Wind curled through it like breath held too long. She stepped inside. Silence followed. No birdsong, no wind, only the echo of a place remembering itself in shudders. The altar was gone, but the stone base remained, just enough to see the blood groove that once ran down its center. Rainwater had gathered in it, stagnant and glinting, like something watching. She bent and touched it. The water trembled. From behind her came a cough. She turned. No one, only the hollow curve of the pew stones half sunk into the soil. Roots had grown between them, like hands gripping from beneath. On the far side of the chapel, the old font still stood, cracked at the base. It leaned slightly, drunk with memory. Inside, the water had turned black. She took one step closer. Milk floated in the dark, thin ribbons of it, swirling like thread. No reflection. A rope of hair floated to the top. She recoiled. But something about it was familiar. Just hair, but the shape of the braid. The knot at the end. She had seen it in a satchel once. Eleanor's. The wind rose again, not through the trees, but up from the stone. She looked around. Cracked icons once nailed into the walls now lay in shards across the earth, their eyes gouged, mouths smoothed into silence. A hymnal page fluttered near her boot. She picked it up. The ink had run, but not from rain. It had bled. Lines scored through the verses, sharp, deliberate. Someone had tried to silence the words. She turned it over. On the back, a child's handwriting, jagged. If you say her name, you remember too much. Another gust stirred the grass outside. It brought with it the smell of ash and the sound of something dragging. She walked to where the chapel doors would have stood. The hinges remained, rusted into place. On the other side of the threshold, the world blurred. Not fog, not quite. Just absence. No paths, no birds, no return. A census page caught in the wind and slapped against her leg. She lifted it. The names had vanished. Only one mark remained, a left handprint in soot. She turned back. Behind her, something had changed. The stone pews were gone. In their place, rows of kneeling figures, still, faceless, draped in sackcloth veils. No mouths, just veils stitched across their faces. Threads wet with something darker than wine. She did not breathe. They did not move. But one turned its head. Its veil hung open inside, only teeth, and beneath its knees, on the moss-dark stone, a hymn burned, upward red-lined, pulsing. Hymn for the abandoned. She backed toward the door. The parish would not let go. Even the land bore no memory of itself. No paths out, no directions in. The trees leaned inward like listeners. She tore a page from the ledger and tried to write her name. The ink would not stay. It puddled, then disappeared. She tried again, first her surname, then only the first letter. Still nothing. Mara pressed her palm against the page. A faint print remained. No lines, no detail, just the idea of a hand. She folded it and placed it in the font. The water accepted it silently. Then it turned milky and began to hum, low, one note, as if a throat cleared in grief. Then another voice, and another. Mara turned. The veiled figures had risen. They held no hymnals. They mouthed no words, but their bodies swayed to the rhythm of a hymn she could not hear fully, but which she knew that it was the one Eleanor hummed. She had heard it first behind the confessional, then beneath the font. And then, in her dreams, behind the sound of her own heartbeat. The trees were moving now, not wind, not storm. They were stepping inward, closing. She clutched the census ledger and ran, through grass that pulled at her ankles, past graves where the stones had crumbled into dust. She passed the signpost, blank now, metal peeled back like skin. The road did not remember itself, but she kept running. Behind her, the parish exhaled, and all around the air forgot. By 1935, no one spoke Eleanor's name. By 1940, no one spoke the parish's. Mara woke, not with the jolt of nightmare, but with the soft drag of breath in a room that should have held none. Her flat was silent, more than silent. It pressed in, as though even the wallpaper had paused to listen. And there, in the hush before thought could form, came the sound again. Knock, 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 dot, not frantic, not even insistent, just expectant, like a child at confession. She sat up, her breath hung pale in the air. The diary lay open on the desk. It had not been before. Her throat closed. A fresh entry, ink still dark and damp, stretched across the page in a hand too uneven to be hers. The date was today. Beneath it no words, just a print, small left hand. The fingers were stained red. The same handprint had appeared in the margins of parish census records. On the inside flap of the chapel hymnal, on the wall of Eleanor's nursery, Mara rose slowly, knees stiff from sleep. But the air felt wrong, thicker somehow, as if she'd risen into water. She crossed to the window and pushed aside the curtain. Nothing, no wind, no footfalls retreating. Only the night, soft and unmoved, still. The knock had come. She had heard it. Her eyes returned to the diary. Its pages had curled like petals in heat. And on the open leaf, something pulsed so faint it could have been imagined, the ink bleeding toward the page's edge. A slow weep. She stepped closer. The red wasn't ink, it was milk, pale at first, then streaked pink, as if it had soured inside the page. She reached toward it. Her finger brushed the handprint, and she remembered. Not fully, not clearly. Just the sound of nails tapping behind a thin door. A lullaby hummed between breaths. The scent of rot, masked by holy water and lavender. Saccage. It wasn't memory, not hers, not, yet it was something being given. A whisper from paper, a gift from Eleanor. The diary snapped shut. Mara flinched. A breath caught in her throat and did not leave. From the far corner of the room, the air shifted. A shadow, not shaped by anything present, moved along the floor. It dragged behind it, wet sound, like something trailing string soaked in milk. She turned slowly. The wallpaper on the south wall had begun to darken, not from damp, from within. It bulged, pulsed slightly, as if the wall had developed breath. Then the sound. Scrape, scrape. 3 lines etched down the paper, as though fingernails, blunt, small, had dragged themselves from top to bottom. Milk wept from the slits. She stared and watched, unable to stop herself, as the wall beneath the wallpaper grew pale, almost skin-like. She took a step back. The cracks in the plaster widened. Beneath them, thin black thread, pulling taut. Something was trying to open from inside. She grabbed the diary and stumbled into the kitchen. The kettle clicked once, though she had not touched it. The fridge door hung ajar, and on the tiles, footprints bare, small, damp, leading from the door to where she stood. They stopped just before her feet. She did not move, but the scent of milk filled her nose, curdled and warm. Something behind her exhaled. The humming began not in her ears, but in her teeth, a dull pressure. The same tune she had traced in the hymnal with the red-lined verses. The same hum from the nursery walls. The same from beneath the chapel font. Eleanor's lullaby. She opened the diary. Another entry had appeared. No date. Just, for words, they buried me wrong. The words smeared slightly under her breath. She dropped the book. It landed open. Pages flapping like wings before falling still. From the hall 3 knocks. Again, closer this time. At her bedroom door. She stepped back. Her heel hit the corner of the table and she nearly fell. A pause. Then a click. The knob turned. The door did not open, but a sheet of paper slid out beneath it. Mara crouched. She didn't touch it. It was the page she had ripped from the red-lined hymnal, the one she'd thought lost. But now, scrawled over the verses, a child's voice had written, "You let them forget me." She picked it up with trembling fingers. The ink smeared again, but this time intentionally, as if the letters didn't want to be read too clearly, as if some truths remained sacred in obscurity. The lights flickered, and for just a moment, the flat bled walls peeled back to reveal chapel stone. Dust shifted like altar ash. The cupboard became a confessional. The mirror held veiled children, who did not reflect. Then gone. She gasped, but the diary was gone too, in its place on the table. The wolfskin clasped, the one from chapter 6. Now stained darker, its button clasp undone. She turned it over in spitty milk. Teeth. Dozens. Arranged in a circle. One still wet. She dropped it. Her hand shook uncontrollably. 3 knocks again. This time inside the wall. She backed toward the front door, but it had vanished, not closed. not locked. Gone. Behind her, the humming grew louder. Her own name began to form inside it, whispered, repeated, but not by her, by a voice smaller, more fragile. A child's. Mara pressed her hands to her ears, and found them wet. She looked. Milk. But laced, now with blood. She turned to the wall, where the knocks had come, and softly saw that the wallpaper had been stitched from old garments, baptismal cloth, veils astole, frayed at the edges, all tied with infant hair. The stitches pulled again, and the voice sang. They didn't bury my name, they baptized it. The wall split, behind it, pages. Hundreds. Bound in skin, every one written in the same childish hand, and on the last one the one still unfinished. Mara, you're writing now, she screamed, but no sound came, only 3 soft knocks, and the diary, again, open on her desk, today's date, written in Eleanor's hand. The page had no end. Mara stood before the diary, as one might a grave that refused to close. The final entry, dated 1927, had begun somewhere near the middle of the book, and had stretched onward without pause, line after line after line, as if Eleanor's hand had never once lifted from the page. The ink was wrong, not black, not even blue. It had bled in cycles, milk white at first, barely legible, then rust red, then something that shimmered faintly violet, like bruising beneath skin. Interspersed were faint lyrics, looping again and again, the lullaby, now unthreaded, now warped. Each time the refrain returned, it had changed slightly, like a voice remembering through pain. Sleep, little one. Cradle your name, the bells won't ring if you don't wake again. The book pulsed slightly beneath her palm. She had not turned the pages. The entry had dotted, responded to her breath, to her doubt. She watched the looping script ripple under a whisper of wind she could not feel. The room was sealed, the curtains shut, tight, and yet the pages fluttered, like a hymnal half sung. There were no paragraph breaks, no salutations, no signature, but it was, unmistakably, a letter. And worse, it was written to her, not in the directness of name, but in the accusation. The way her sins had been named before she'd known them, the way the words reached forward, not back, as if the hand that wrote them existed still, tethered to the next breath she would take. She read, you looked at the ledger, you traced my name, you heard me in the font, you carried me here, you should not have. She stepped back, nausea rising like bile behind her eyes. The diary did not stop, as if now that it had begun speaking to her, it had no need for time or structure or breath. It simply continued, a slow bleed of words from a wound left open nearly a century. And then, her name, written plainly, Mara Eleanor Thorne, the middle name she had never used. She turned. Behind her, the flat blurred, not shifted blurred, the mirror wept steam. The window rippled, and the wallpaper beside the bed began to curl back on itself, revealing brick-thin iconography, then nothing at all. She looked down at the page had changed. July 5, 2025. The girl reads her name. The room forgets its shape. It was dated today. She turned another page. It waited for her. She remembers what was never hers. The lullaby is in her teeth now. Mara stumbled backward. Her calf hit the edge of the desk, but there was no pain, no sound. The room swallowed, even her gasp. A shadow passed over the wall, slow and dragging. Then another. She turned to the diary. A single word had appeared mid-page. Kneel. She did not remember choosing to obey, but her knees hit the wood. A cold spread from the boards upward, a rot that soaked into the marrow. She watched her breath rise, and then from behind the door, a sound, not a knock. A letter sliding through. It landed at her feet. She didn't reach for it. It opened on its own. Its script matched the diary, but it was shorter, blunter. A single sentence, again and again. You will die in the mirror. You will die in the mirror. You will die. She stood. The glass beside the bed had fogged completely, but her reflection was still visible, and smiling it raised its hand, left pressed it to the inside of the glass. Mara did not move, but her reflection did. Its lips parted, and the lullaby came from the glass, soft as milk falling on stone. Rock, now child in the cradle of dust, the saints have burned, the ropes are rust. She turned away, but the diary followed her, not literally, but each time she blinked, it was nearer. She backed into the hall. The light bulb flickered, and the ceiling leaked milk. First pale, then clotted. She smelled iron. From the kitchen, a sound, scratching. Not like a mouse, like writing ink. Across dry paper, she turned the corner. The counters were empty, but every cabinet had been opened, and every surface now bore Eleanor's hand. One long, unbroken sentence traced across the upper cupboard. Do not read the hymn that ends with rope. And across the refrigerator door, do not hum after midnight. And across the floor tiles, in red, do not sleep with the veil undone. She turned back to the living room, but it was gone. The diary was now a staircase, paper bent and folded into steps, and beneath it, pages, hundreds, no, thousands, all lined with looping script, every one predicting death. Not in metaphor. In fact, Brother Junaid will drown in the well, though the well is dry. Sister Larissa will be found in the cistern, throat filled with veils. Father Bede is already inside the confessional. She read her own name again, this time, with no ambiguity. Mara will be the archivist who catalogues her own end. The lullaby returned, faint, from inside her head. She touched her ear. Milk leaked from it. She opened the diary again. A fresh entry waited. She turned the page. She saw the knock before it came. She opened the door anyway. The knock came. 3 soft thuds. She looked up. The flat had no door now, only mirror. Cracked. The lullaby reached a final refrain. Sleep, little one, don't open the skin. The parish is hollow. Let silence begin. She stepped toward the mirror. Her hand met its twin, and the diary turned one final page. Eleanor's final entry began in 1927. It has not stopped writing. The flat had gone soft with silence. Not empty, just quiet in the wrong places. Like a church after confession, when the sin still lingers but no one dares breathe it aloud. Mara stood barefoot in the hallway. Her camera blinked red in the corner, forgotten but still filming. The diary was open on the floor behind her, pages rippling toward the doorway, as though reaching for air, for witness. The floorboards had swollen. The wallpaper peeled in slow, rhythmic strips. Milk wept from beneath the skirting, like some tired secret finally leaking loose. And still, she did not move. She had not spoken in 3 days. The lullaby now hummed without her. Beneath the plaster, behind the lights, under her tongue when she tried to swallow. On the second night, she'd stitched her own lips shut, not as punishment, not even as penance, only to keep her mouth from finishing the song. But the mirror still sang. She'd placed towels beneath the door, covered the vents, disconnected the internet, thrown the diary out the window twice. It returned each time, softer than before, less of a book than a mouth opening, and always open to the same page. Do not bury what you've already baptized. By dawn of the 3rd day, her camera began recording by itself. She had not touched it, but the red light blinked, and she blinked back. She moved now like she was remembering how each gesture measured, like walking through water, quiet, breathless. On the kitchen counter, the glass of milk she had not poured had curdled. A child's tooth floated near the rim. She didn't look away. The air stank of sleep and rope, and, in her ears, a whisper only half hers. I said the hymn backward. I said the hymn backward. The curtains had shriveled against the windows. The daylight that came through no longer belonged to the street outside. It bent sideways, like time had grown brittle at the edges. She turned toward the mirror. In the hallway, it no longer reflected anything, only wrote, in breath, she has become the archive. Then, there is no Mara. Then nothing, just her reflection blinking once, twice and, then still. She pressed her palm to the glass. From the other side, her reflection lifted a different hand, the wrong hand. The diary flipped itself shut behind her. She didn't look. The camera stayed. Red dot. She entered the bedroom, no longer hers. The crib in the corner had not been there. That morning, its veil hung limp with soot. Bells sewn into the lace tinkled, soft and sour. She approached it. Inside, nothing, no baby. No form. Only milk pooled at the base, forming words she could not read. When she leaned closer, the surface rippled with a breath that wasn't hers. The light flickered. It pulsed with each lullaby note, matching the slow heartbeat behind the wall. She blinked. The crib was gone. The rope hung in its place, knotted just once, stained with hymnals. The floor beneath it dampened, not with water, but ink. The diary had followed her again, unasked, now open across the floor, her own handwriting scrawled across the margins. Only she had never written this, but her name had Signed it, not just Mara. Mara, Eleanor. And below it, Eleanor's hand. Older now, thicker, crueler, looped the same line again and again. One must never archive a living hymn. She turned to the camera. It blinked red still, perched on the dresser. It had followed her without moving. She lifted her stitched lips, one by one. The knots fell loose, not by her doing, but like the thread itself, had grown tired of silence. The lullaby spilled from her throat, slow and wet and wrong. Rock now, child. Let silence feed where teeth grow sharp and saints still bleed. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from memory, as if she'd sung this before, as someone else, or perhaps as no one at all. The light bulb above her cracked. She didn't flinch. The mirror beside the dresser grew black, not shadow dash depth. It opened. Inside, her reflection waited, but older, mouth torn wide, eyes inked over, and behind it, a hallway. Brick dash lined, wet. Lined with cribs made of rope and song. She moved toward it, one bare foot sinking into the milk-wet floorboards, the other bleeding. The camera followed. It turned slightly as she passed. The footage would later show that. Moment slowed. The way the lullaby distorted, the way the reflection smiled first, the way Mara's head tilted just slightly before she stepped into the mirror. As if listening for permission, and receiving it, she vanished. Without sound, only the diary remained and the camera still, blinking red, recording nothing, or everything. Hours passed, then days. No one came, until the footage surfaced, clipped, looped, uploaded by no known source. A 16-minute reel, titled only, "Do Not Hum What You Do Not Know." Its final frame was still Mara's room. No figure, only the mirror, only the camera's red light. And just as the video fades to black, a flicker, a reflection, standing and blinking. But the eyes are not Mara's, they are Eleanor's, and they do not blink again. The footage ends, and below it, a final warning from the narrator, half glitch, half whisper. This footage was never meant to be seen, and now you've seen it.